Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at energy efficiency and the opportunities for businesses to make substantial savings. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the Energy and Carbon Management channel here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. We have Dr. Greg Lavery, CEO of Lavery Pennell and lead author of the Next Manufacturing Revolution study. We're also very fortunate to be joined by Andrew Griffith, Sustainability Manager at Nestle, who's going to give an insight into what they're doing. Today's presentations will last around 30 minutes, which will leave us with 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So just type in your question and press send, and then we'll wait to the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the presentations, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Greg, who will get us started with today's presentation. So over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Stephen. So welcome, everyone. Today's discussion is around energy efficiency, which is one of the next manufacturing revolution topics. So let me sort of introduce the concept or the context for this discussion. We are a sustainability strategy advisors working in the space of increasing profitability whilst improving sustainability. Some of the areas that we work in are resource efficiency, which we'll talk about a little bit more, recycling, remanufacturing, supply chain efficiency, new products and business models, and clean tech, all of which create greater profits and greater sustainability. The context for this report is that last year we released with the University of Cambridge's Institute of Manufacturing and 2 Degrees a report that we'd all co-authored around resource efficiency, and one of the key topics in that is energy efficiency. And the reason we called it the next manufacturing revolution is that what we found is that there are opportunities so large around energy efficiency, waste reduction, and that seven topics in total, that actually it amounts to a revolution in how we manufacture in the UK. This is one, I think this is number 3 of 7 talks or webinars with 2 Degrees, stepping through those 7. And if you're interested in remanufacturing and resource efficiency leading to growth, I believe they're already mounted on the 2 Degrees platform. So without further delay, a little bit more, let's dive into energy efficiency and create an understanding here of what's going on. On the slide now, if we look at what's happened since 1990 in terms of energy consumption in the UK by the manufacturing sector, we've actually seen it decline, and quite substantially, from around 37 million tonnes of oil equivalent per annum in 1990 to 2 decades later, around 27. That's substantial, and there are a number of reasons for that, some structural, like the offshoring of a substantial part of manufacturing, although let's remember the UK has retained pretty much over this time, that 20-year period, a position around 10th or 11th in the world manufacturers in the sort of order of size of manufacturing industry. So we've not outsourced all of our manufacturing. However, energy is reduced, partly, as I say, through outsourcing overseas, but also one of the key factors on the next slide is what's happened with energy prices. And whilst we've all been aware of our own domestic energy bills going up, if you look at what's been happening on a commercial sense and industrial sense, it's really interesting to see that since the 1990s, and in fact before that as well, energy prices for most styles of energy have been coming down to an inflection point in around the late 90s and early 2000s, when actually energy prices started to go up, and they've continued beyond 2011 to go up. And if you compare the prices, or in this case, normalized adjusted ratios here, we had the cost of some energy forms around the sort of 50 to 100 sort of comparison points there. And we've got things like heavy crude up in 2011, up at 450, crude oil up at over 200, close to 250. So all the energy prices have gone up, which if you look at the previous slide, and let me skip back to that one, you can actually see this energy price increase actually reflected in an inflection point around the year 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, when actually the gradient of improvement actually improved. So we can say actually the energy prices have led to some improvements. But that's not the full story, because actually there's been some really good work going on beyond this sort of background improvement rate related to energy prices. And to look at that, what we did is we scanned a whole bunch of sort of top companies who are recognised for the great work they've been doing in sustainability, as well as a few other household names. And what we can see on graph 4 is how we've plotted their progress. Now, this is quite a complex graph, so let me take a moment to explain it. So the x-axis here is the number of years since a company started really addressing its energy efficiency, and that's recognised by them setting a baseline, which we've inertially called year 0, and we can see how long they've been going on this journey. The y-axis is the average annual energy savings they've achieved. And if you combine the two, so you take, for example, if you've been making an 8% improvement for 15 years, you'll be somewhere close to where Toyota is there around the sort of 71, 72% improvement. Similarly, if you've gone hard at a 12% per annum improvement for around 12 years, you'd be also on that 75% improvement since you began that journey. And so what we're able to plot there is ISO lines, and you can see the orange one is then a sort of 10% improvement, yellow is 25%, light green is 50%, and the dark green is 75%. And what this shows is enormous variance in some very household names as to how they've gone about their energy efficiency. And let's recognise as well, Toyota in Europe has achieved, and that includes their Burnaston plant here in the UK and a number on the continent, have achieved overall a 70% reduction in their energy use per vehicle. So this is energy intensity, which is energy use per unit of output. In some instances, it's tonnes. In some instances, it's the number of vehicles. And there are some other great performers in there. Around that 50% line, Henkel, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, who we're welcoming Andy to give Nestle's story following me, Danone, Unilever, ST Microelectronics. And there's some surprise players down there who are performing very well on an annual basis that have just started their journey. And there's a couple of guys in there like General Mills and Coca-Cola who have been on the journey for 5 or so years and actually not improved at a really fantastic rate compared with the leaders. So actually, takeaways from this research show that, firstly, it doesn't matter which sector you're in, there's real variance in performance within those sectors. And also, a key takeaway is that there have been some quite extraordinary gains made over a period of a decade or so by some of these leaders. And that's quite inspirational to say, well, how did Toyota and Procter & Gamble and Henkel do it? So our research looked into that and said, what are the sort of ways that these companies succeeded? And what we found is that good practice companies who are up there with the top performance in terms of energy efficiency savings used 4 different types of opportunities. And the typical benefits that you can see are listed there on this slide. So the first type of opportunity is incremental, which is behaviour and cultural change, such as monitoring, identifying anomalous behaviour, educating staff to turn off lights and turn down equipment in breaks, those sorts of things, and making sure cleaners don't put the lights and air conditioning on very early in the morning before actually it needs to be used at that sort of intensity. So these are often referred to as quick wins. They're fast, they're easy, they're fairly low capital. The second type of opportunity that leading companies do is process and systems change, where they say, let's actually figure out what we do as processes and make those a little bit more efficient by building in improvements, such as by having energy management teams constantly chasing things, changing operating procedures, changing materials, and setting up reporting systems. So these don't necessarily cost a lot of money because they are about processes and systems, but they can take a little bit longer because they are changing the status quo within a manufacturing organisation. The third area is structural change, and this is the one that most engineers love because this is about shiny new equipment that's more efficient. And so what we find is that many companies spend a lot of effort finding those new bits of equipment. Now, the problem with that is that that can be fairly high capex, and you can come up with a list of things like LED lighting, variable speed drives, insulation, etc., which will pay back fairly quickly. But then there's a long list of things that actually pay back fairly slowly, and the danger of focusing only on structural change is that pretty soon you get to the bottom of a list of things that are actually can be paid back within your corporate payback period, and the engineers say, well, there's nothing more we can do until we have a longer payback period and a lot more capex, which is not strictly true because there's these other levels. the fourth area is core redesign, which is a little bit novel, thinking about new products, new business models to say, why is it we have our products like we do? Can we redesign them? Can we change that business model to lease instead of sell? And what are all the other things we can do around our offering to reduce the energy use, not only for ourselves, but also for our customers? And this is where some significant benefits can occur. But you can appreciate, whilst there are big savings, there are also really big challenges around changing the way an organisation thinks about its product and its business model that can lead to quite slow and difficult approval of those new business models. So, takeaway from this research says there are 4 different levels, and subsequently our research has found, and working with companies has found that actually it's very rare that companies are addressing more than 1 or 2 or a maximum 3 of these. So there's always plenty of opportunity in our experience to act at one of these different types of opportunities within organisations. The next thing we did with the University of Cambridge and 2 degrees was actually quantify the size of the benefits, which varies by sector because we recognised that there were gaps in what different sectors were doing according to that last table, and changes and differences in average performance versus good practice performance in those sectors. And what we found is close to £2 billion pounds per annum of savings, and you can see them distributed there. We had to be conservative in a couple of sectors, but the overall picture is that there's that close to 2 billion in savings is compared with a total energy bill for UK manufacturing of about 10 billion a year. That is overall a 20% saving available, and that surprised us that it was that large. But on the other hand, when we looked at other studies who'd actually tried to quantify the size of the opportunity as well, they were also saying, well, if you allow for the fact that some of them didn't count in some of the different types of opportunities, actually their range is not too far from the sort of 20% that we came up with there on the left-hand side, which gave us great confidence that we weren't making stuff up, but actually our calculations were robust, and gives us actually great confidence actually to sort of talk about the size of the opportunities available. And a key takeaway then is, well, how big is this? Well, let's think about 20% opportunity or a payback period of somewhere between 2 and 3 years, which is a sort of rule of thumb based on some real bottom-up calculations that we've done. So that's sort of an introduction to energy efficiency. I'm going to leave it to Andy to sort of get into the nitty-gritty of how Nestle has been so successful in using their energy efficiency. But please, if you'd like to read more about the work that we did for the next manufacturing revolution, there's a whole chapter in there, 1 of 7, that deals entirely with energy efficiency, which has more data and more sectoral data. Specifically, if you wanted to pull out the benchmarks for your sector and have a think about those, the link's there. And feel free to contact me at greg.lavery@laverypennell.com. So I'll hand over to Andy. Andy, if you'd like to take over the controls, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this.
Yep. So, afternoon. I'm Andy Griffiths. I'm Sustainability Manager at Nestle. And as Greg mentioned, what I want to do is just give a bit of insight into how we are driving resource efficiency from both the Nestle UK and Ireland perspective, and also more specifically at a site level as well. So to start with, just to provide a little bit of context, what we've done with our UK business is perhaps a little bit different to some other organisations. We decided rather than going narrow but deep, we would actually select one of our sites to be a pilot site to develop sustainable technologies and approaches, and then as we've proven the success of those, then blueprint those and share those across our other sites, both in the UK and more broadly across Europe. So we had a look around looking at which sites would be most appropriate, and although a number of organisations have had some success driving sustainability at greenfield sites, we decided we would focus on one of our older sites, which again will give us some insight in terms of real high core learnings and ensure we had maximum transferability. We're also looking for a complex site, which would again give us the opportunity to share those learnings more broadly across our other sites. And as a result, we selected our Fordham factory at Newcastle. So this is a confectionery site. And our vision around this model was to establish the Fordham site as a sustainable low-carbon site and use it as a blueprint for other sites to follow, but also as a build on that, now looking at how we can share those learnings more broadly and also outside of the business. As part of that rollout, we initially started with the typical kind of three-legged stool type model, so in terms of economic, social and environmental, but found that we got limited traction with both our employees and also community and local stakeholders. So we restructured our model on a 6-pillar basis to try and simplify it and make it more open, more accessible. So the first 3 are focused on resource efficiency. So we have energy, water and waste. And then the second 3 really close that overall environmental circle. So in terms of biodiversity and natural capital, value chain, and then most importantly all in terms of really making a difference and driving that transition for community and people. So in terms of our impact, we reference everything back to 2006 as a baseline, and you can see here from the graph we have that at an absolute level we've managed to successfully decouple our absolute energy and water use from our volume growth within the business. Obviously, as you can see from a solid waste perspective, we haven't managed to achieve that quite so openly. And again, we'll look at intensity in a moment. But you can see in terms of energy and water, we've reduced our usage by 12% and 39% respectively. The other thing that we've driven on waste is a real focus on zero waste to landfill. So again, a clear perception that zero waste to landfill was either unachievable or quite challenging. So again, in terms of driving that journey, it was important that we tried to focus and engage our employees and our key stakeholders in what that journey would look like. And we're now in a position where 8 of our sites are verified as zero waste to landfill. And although that's not the ideal starting point in terms of the hierarchy of waste, what it's done is it's allowed us to clearly message what the journey looks like and start to engage our employees in the waste hierarchy and how they can contribute much more effectively. Then when you translate that into intensity, so resource intensity, you start to see some very significant reductions. So this is reflecting our resource use per tonne of product. And you can see even on a solid waste basis, we've seen a 20% reduction, but with our energy and water reductions being significantly greater since 2006. And again, we've seen that reflected across all our sites to some extent, but with some sites, particularly the Newcastle site of the last couple of years, really leading the charge on that one. And you would see, for example, on an energy perspective, just in the last 2 years, we've reduced our energy intensity by 30% and our water intensity by another 26%. So some significant reductions coming through. And you can see when you plot that against the 4 key aspects that Greg referenced earlier, from an incremental perspective, it's almost become part of the furniture. We're clearly trying to drive with our employees a change in understanding and awareness in terms of what resource efficiency is about, particularly from an energy perspective, with it being accessible for them and how they can contribute. And again, the key element of that is messaging it back to the what's in it for me. So helping people to understand how they can make a difference, what it means for them, and once they start to engage, then actually starting to introduce them to the broader environmental context and what that means. Well, obviously, we continue to drive that with that cultural change being one of the biggest opportunities in terms of driving a groundswell and therefore not just an improvement in resource efficiency on site, but also acting as ambassadors and sharing those learnings outside of the business. From a processes and systems perspective, a whole raft of changes and opportunities that we've driven across the business. I'll come on to energy target setting in a moment, but that's really helped us to deliver some significant reductions in terms of energy and water efficiency. We also have our Nestlé continuous excellence system, which again also helps drive the cultural shift, clearly recognising and understanding the impact that effective maintenance has on energy and water, so not just on line performance, and also implementing effectively a rating system similar to your white goods ratings, which help us to identify the resource efficiency or specifically energy efficiency of those assets, but also hotspotting where the both technical and operational opportunities sit, and also specifically at Ford introducing our green transport plan. And structural change, again, across the market, a range of significant step changes, particularly in terms of introduction of new processes and ensuring optimal energy efficiency around those, looking at heat capture and moisture capture, energy efficient lighting, and also boiler replacement optimization. And then a key project which has been delivered specifically at our Forden site, which was the introduction of a novel anaerobic digestion plant, which allows us to process both liquid and solid waste within a fast reactor system. And that's hooked onto a micro CHP, giving us both thermal and electrical output. So in effect, we're taking our core effluent and solid waste and producing maybe not potable but clean water, biogas with a high methane content which feeds the CHP, and then a land improver from a solids perspective. So no environmental waste or environmental impact from that, those outputs from the process. Again, key awareness that that's not necessarily operating at the top of the waste hierarchy, but allowing us to manage some of our more challenging waste streams, whilst in parallel we drive waste reduction at source. And again, using that as an opportunity to help open up and explore other core structural opportunities. And again, justify both to the business and also rationalise to external parties the real financial payback that can be delivered from some of these projects. So there's a significant environmental opportunity, but also from an investment perspective, a significant return opportunity as well. In total, specifically on energy, that's helped us deliver a 42% reduction in energy per tonne since 2006, and more broadly across the UK as a whole, a 36% reduction. So some significant improvements, but the real focus now on using that as a platform to continue to evolve and improve our resource efficiency. So I mentioned earlier on about the ETS, the energy target setting. Just wanted to spend a couple of minutes sharing that in a little bit more detail. So this is a Nestlé process that's been developed at a global level. We've specifically rolled this out across the UK and Ireland and piloted it over the last couple of years. What this process does is it requires the site to do some preparatory work in terms of understanding and collating core data around energy and water. So we use this process for both energy and water performance and the processes, and then structuring it in a number of different formats, so using Sankey diagrams, water maps, energy maps, etc. Once we've collated all that data and used a tick list to ensure we're fully covered from a preparatory perspective, we then pull together a range of experts. So that will be internal experts from the factory that we're looking at, experts from our broader group resource, but then also bringing in external experts as well. So from key partners, for example, the likes of Nalco, Schneider, Spirax, etc. We would then pull that team together and over a 2-week focused period start to disassemble that data, work through it and understand where the core themes, core opportunities were using those multidisciplinary teams. And from that, pull together a clear both operational master plan and capital investment plan that would carry us through for the next 3 years. And within that, we'd have clear detail in terms of the capital requirements, the annual savings on a project-by-project and totalised basis, and what that payback would look like, but also what the environmental benefits would be, and then comparing that against ease of implementation. And from that, we can then prioritise that operational and investment plan for the next 3 years. So that, although it might seem quite resource intensive, in terms of the level of insight and real delivery, has been a significant step forward for us, both at a market and site level. So that gives you a quick overview of Nestlé UK and specifically our Newcastle site from a resource efficiency perspective, specifically focusing on energy. Okay, and I shall hand you back to Steve.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Andy. That was a great overview from Greg and Andy there. So we'll now go into the Q&A session. And Andy, maybe one for you to begin with, but someone's asking, are you always taking an individual approach to getting technology through the business case, or are you sometimes looking at portfolio-wide applications?
Sorry, Stephen, you were breaking up there again. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. So someone's asking, do you always look at technologies on an individual technology by technology basis when you're looking at the business case, or do you sometimes look at a sort of portfolio approach and sort of group technologies together to try and get some of the ones with a sort of less favourable payback period through the business case? Yeah,
it really, it's probably not a specific answer as perhaps the individual would like. There is a bit of horses for courses. Typically what we would try and do is look at each project on a project-by-project basis or technology-by-technology basis, just to ensure that project in itself is robust. Now, what we then would quite frequently do is then start to cluster some of those projects together to see if there are any kind of benefits in terms of trying to deliver those projects as a combined effort. So there is the possibility that some perhaps less favourable projects with less favourable payback might drop into there, either because it has a bigger impact cumulatively, or because it actually delivers significant benefits on, for example, carbon or water reduction, and might not necessarily make the grade purely on the financial return itself.
Right.
May I add to that, Stephen?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, so Andy's given a Nestlé perspective there. Some of our other clients do adopt a portfolio approach. And let me describe briefly the benefits of a portfolio approach. So for example, one client, quite a large FMCG company, the director of engineering applied for a £20 million fund to fund a bunch of different energy efficiency things. And the advantages that he found in doing that are, so first of all, it's lower risk, because you're not betting your reputation on one particular technology doing exactly what you thought it would do. And so if you've got a portfolio, some can overperform, some can underperform, and you still end up hitting your targets there, or in his case, exceeding. Secondly, it gives you a bit of freedom. So if actually prices and equipment are changing over time, you can sort of redivert some of that money to some of the more attractive things when you actually get on the ground. And the third advantage is scale. It meant that he was able to purchase large volumes of the different bits of equipment that he was buying, like variable speed drives, and that gave him a further advantage. So, and of course, there's the scale advantage of not having to go back to the CapEx committee asking for more and more money to do things. So that gave him a lot of freedom to do things within the year, and he knocked it out of the park. So horses for courses, and certainly don't discount the portfolio idea if you think that your capital approvals committee would have the appetite for quite a large sum of money.
The other thing as well, Stephen, just to build on the response, the other thing that we also do, much more so in recent years, is actually look at building a lot of our resource efficiency and environmental improvements into pre-existing projects. So if we're going to drive, for example, a structural project, we make sure that we've contained within that project all of those key environmental opportunities as well. So you get some benefit in terms of almost a non-environmental project helping to support some of the environmental improvements going forwards as well.
Great, thanks, Andy. A sort of follow-on question we've had in is, was energy use per product one of your targets? And was this done deliberately to get greater buy-in from senior management?
You mean in terms of energy intensity?
Yeah.
So energy usage per tonne. To be honest, it's almost the opposite. If you speak to our senior management team, they're much more focused on absolute energy and absolute water usage. What we found, though, is when we start to talk to both our employees and to local stakeholders, even a number of the local NGOs, they find it difficult to interpret what that really means. At a global level, obviously, there's a high expectation that we're making an absolute reduction, absolute difference. But locally, people find it much easier to rationalise and understand a usage number per tonne. They can help put it into context. So that's why we work with the intensity type figures at a local or site level.
Thanks, Andy. Greg, one here for you. So you mentioned sort of the various stages earlier on, and someone was asking at what stages are companies turning to a core redesign? So I think probably what they mean by that, have they gone through the other 3 stages prior to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one we're asked every so often. What we've found is that it's very easy to fall into a pattern of saying, look, we'll just do all the incremental stuff because that's the fastest payback, and then we'll move to the process and systems, and then we'll think about structural, and then we'll think about core redesign. Practically, though, there are a couple of reasons why that very rarely happens, and in fact some good reasons why you shouldn't think about it that way. So first of all, the world is a bit more complex than that, and engineers in your organisation are probably already doing shiny new equipment structural stuff anyway, and that's good because that's bringing in savings. The other thing we found, which was really interesting, we had a really good look at what Dow and DuPont do in terms of their energy efficiency, and what we discovered is that every year these guys have another round of incremental improvements where they sort of essentially have suggestion boxes saying people with good ideas can come forward, and most of those are behaviourally related. And what they found is that for the past 30 years, every year they get 800 or so suggestions that they implement, and every year they're therefore saving a very large amount of money. And that actually hasn't gone down over time. It's actually continued every year to occur. So thoughts that over time you'll actually exhaust all the incremental opportunities appear not to be true from that sort of data. So if you wait to exhaust those incremental opportunities, you could be waiting a very, very long time. And in their case, 30 years, and it doesn't look as though it's exciting. So what we recommend is actually a sort of parallel process. And the reason why you would do a little bit of staging is actually to prove that there are good savings through energy efficiency and adopt perhaps something called a revolving fund that says, look, if we save some money, let's put some of that aside, and agree that with senior management, specifically the CFO, put some of that aside to fund some of the more expensive actions that you can take. So, for instance, if you make a 20% saving in efficiency through some very good behavioural stuff at a very fast payback period and some process and system in there, you might have savings in year that you can actually put some of that aside to fund some of the more expensive capital or structural element that you might want to improve as well. So that's one reason to go after the lower capex items, that is the incremental and the process and system ones earlier. However, leaving things like structural until down the road is actually a mistake as well, because there's some really good things that can be done there. The technology side of things will really engage the more technically minded within the organisation, and core redesign really needs to be thought of in the background anyway. So asking that big question of why is it we sell light bulbs when really all the client wants is light, or why is it, in the case of Fuji Xerox, as well as Kyocera and all the other photocopier makers, they said, why is it we sell £5,000 photocopiers when one £10 piece breaks and the client has to throw all of those away? So nowadays they offer a whole of life service that maintains those photocopiers, and in fact they've moved their revenue model from a sell the one piece of equipment to a lease the piece of equipment on a part sort of rental but also part pay per page copy, which means that they've changed that model, and that's led to enormous resource efficiency for them in terms of remanufacturing and not having to throw core equipment pieces away. plus they're focused on energy efficiency in doing that. So we'd recommend an approach that thinks about all of these rather than a thinking that one needs to happen before the other.
Great stuff. Thank you, Greg. Andy, another question here for you is, how have you rated your systems?
Basically, what we do is we break the asset or process down into its core constituent elements and then look at what the nominal usage should be. So basically, if you take a theoretical position, theoretically what is the lowest energy input required to manage that part of the process? And then what we do is once we've worked up the theoretical model, we can then overlay that with practically how is that process performing, both from a technical perspective or technology perspective, but also from an operational perspective, so understanding how we're managing certain parts of the startup procedure, for example. Once you've got that, we can then, in a similar way as to what you would see on white goods, you can then start, and obviously it's for us to define those levels, define a different rating category, which helps us to both cross-reference site to site. So if a number of our sites have, for example, a wafer oven, we can look at which of those ovens is being run and managed in the most optimum way, and also understand which oven has had technological changes applied which have made it more efficient, and then use that hot spotting process to share those learnings and adapt either our operation or the technical design of that kit elsewhere. So that's broadly how it operates. Obviously, each technical model for each asset is fairly unique, so it can be quite resource hungry in terms of defining that theoretical model initially.
Thanks, Andy. So we've got a couple more questions here. First one for you again, Andy, but Greg, you might like to add your thoughts afterwards. But I think they're referring to your anaerobic digestion system, but they're saying, have you used any government grants to help fund the work that you've been doing? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, so we haven't used any upfront grants. Again, most of our investments, we work on the incentives benefits. So for the AD plant, we get two benefits. We get the feed-in tariff for the electricity that's generated through the micro CHP, and then we also get the renewable heat incentive on the thermal energy that we reuse. Although, again, without getting into too much detail, obviously we can only claim for certain parts of that. We can't reclaim that for the heat that's used in the plant itself. So those two elements provided a significant chunk of, or contributed significantly to the payback. The other element that really had a big impact, although it's clearly not a grant or incentive, but was the reduction in our effluent bill. I mean, this plant is reducing our COD by probably about 98% and our total spended solids by about 95%. So the biggest chunk of benefit financially was delivered through the change to our effluent flow.
Thanks, Andy. Greg, have you got any thoughts to add around sort of government grants and working those into the business case?
Yeah, just a word of caution really around that. So we've helped a couple of clients to sort of negotiate their way through it. There's a lot of political risk that you need to be certain of. Most engineering projects where you install this sort of plant, most of the risk is technical and engineering risk. But it's worth noting that the government is changing its levels of support for renewable heat incentive and for feed-in tariffs for energy, for electricity as well. And really worth understanding that in great detail before you actually commit to a project, because there have been some organisations caught in the planning process when there's been a digression, and there are all sorts of quite complicated rules as to how the feed-in tariffs and renewable heat incentives step down as more and more plants come online in order not to exhaust the public funds, which of course is some of the problems that have occurred in some of the other countries around the world. But the UK's put in safeguards for that. So understanding where those cut-offs are what other projects are in the pipeline, how the government's feeling about particular technologies and whether they're likely to have a review to change the level of support. All of that is very important for the particular technology that you might be thinking of doing. So just a note of caution there, and I'm sure everyone on the call does their homework, but there's a particular area that you should make sure you're putting enough time into to answer the tough questions that can come at the investment committee stage.
Thanks, Greg. And one final question. So, Andy, you mentioned around the work you're doing on behaviour change, and someone's just asking any lessons that you learned or any tips and advice for implementing behaviour change amongst employees.
Yeah, I guess there are two key ones. Well, yeah, two key ones. One is in terms of really thinking about the target audience and how you're going to engage them. So, again, an example was with the model where we started with the three-legged stool, a great academic model, but a model that really didn't kind of fit with our employees in terms of their understanding. And really against that backdrop, really trying to address the what's in it for me. So again, a lot of our employees, because they get very mixed messages through the media, it's difficult for them to determine necessarily whether they really want to engage on that environmental journey. So again, if you can open the door by answering the what's in it for me question first, and then once they're engaged through that route, you can then start to bring for the kind of environmental messaging behind that. So that's one key learning. The other one is very much about the cascade of KPIs. So there's been a tendency for organisations as they cascade KPIs literally just to reflect that KPI at every level. So the number might change, but the measure remains the same. And again, when you do that, it can be quite difficult for some of those employees at Sharp End to really understand and interpret how they can make a difference. So if they get a target of 3% energy reduction, great, but so what? What can I do that's going to deliver that? And how can I understand whether I'm really having that impact on an ongoing basis? So what we've done through our cascade process is as you start to cascade that measure through, you move it from a KPI to what we call a PPI, a process performance indicator. And then when you get right down to the sharp end, we convert it into what we call an API, an activity performance indicator. And what we're really trying to do there is structure a measure around an activity, which is very visual. It's very easy for people to measure, and they can determine whether they're making a real contribution. So we go through that process of identifying what those key APIs will be with the team, for them to understand what the energy and water profile will be for their plant, where the key hotspots are, and then what activities they do that influence that most significantly, and then actually measure that activity. So it might be, for example, how long it takes them to change the line over, or it might be how long they run the plant at a certain temperature during a dwell period or an idle period. So then when they're measuring those activities, it's really easy for them to engage in the core delivery as a result.
Thanks, Andy. Greg, have you got anything you want to add around sort of behaviour change?
No, I think we've run out of time. I mean, Andy's done a really great job. Except perhaps to add that really interesting to see Nestlé's use of videos as well to sort of start to break the messages down very simply. Did you want to mention that briefly, Andy?
Yeah, again, we're starting to leverage that a lot more probably over the last few months in terms of using video footage to open up some of those messages and help people understand, again, some of the principles behind energy and water. But the other thing is, rather than having highly polished, professional-looking videos, again, we're trying to encourage the guys at the sharp end to help construct those. So some of our videos might look a little bit amateur, shall we say, but actually we're finding they have real impact in terms of that local ownership.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andy. So we'll draw today's session to an end now, but I'd just like to thank Greg and Andy for their time and for getting through so many questions, and also for everyone who's joined us for the webinar. Just to remind everyone, a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform, and as soon as those go live, I'll send out the links to those. So I hope you found today interesting and useful, and you'll be able to join us for future webinars in the coming months. So thank you, everyone.